The African Development Bank, AfDB President Dr. Akinwumi Adesina recently said that the highway to wealth on the continent is from the export of value-added agricultural products. He was speaking at the 2023 Africa Investment Forum Marketplace in Marrakesh, Morocco, on the theme Unlocking Africa's Value Chains. Adesina, while revealing that Africa must end the export of raw agricultural commodities, said opening up Africa's economic potential along its agricultural value chain would make it possible for the launch of the Alliance for Special Agro-Industrial Processing Zones, that is called SAPZs, and this will make Africa a global player in food and agriculture. So this morning, joining me from Kaduna is Ibrahim Maigari. Ahmadu is the founder and CEO, RiceAfrika Technologies. Of course, RiceAfrika Technologies is a tech-driven agri optimization service provider with operations in Nigeria and Tanzania. And of course, there's the hope that it will expand to Rwanda. Thank you so much, Ibrahim, for joining us on Business Edge.
Thank you, Lekan. Thank you for having me.
Now, the African Development Bank estimates that Africa loses about $75 billion annually due to the export of raw materials instead of finished goods. And the president, Adesina, said that Africa must end the export of raw agricultural commodities. So why does Africa find it more convenient to export its raw materials than having to process them and have a more diversified market?
Thank you, Lekan. Before answering your question, I think it will also be very important to add to this conversation by quoting what Dr. Adesina said a few years ago. And I quote, he said in 2017, Africa spent about $64.5 billion on importing food. And we may spend even more in subsequent years. Currently, we're spending over 100 billion. And he said, this is unsustainable, irresponsible, and unaffordable. It is also completely unnecessary because Africa has 65% of the world's remaining uncultivated arable land, an abundance of fresh water, and about 300 days of sunshine every year. And more than 60% of Africa's working population is engaged in agriculture. And the soil across most of the continent is rich and fertile. If you look at from Cape Town to Casablanca, you know. So Africa export raw materials, I think, in my own opinion, for the same reasons others too export, simply to end forex. And I think the answer is, there's nothing wrong, actually, in my own opinion, in exporting raw materials. Even industrial economics do that. But the problem is, do we have the wherewithal, do we have the willpower to stop such exports? And why are we still exporting? If you look at what we are exporting at the moment, African agricultural exports are dominated by a few product categories. And the top five are cocoa, edible fruits and nuts, coffee, tea and spices, fish and edible vegetables and roots. This makes up about 53% of all agricultural export. So my honest answer is that there's nothing actually wrong in exporting raw materials. Like I said, after all, industrial economics like the US and most countries in Europe do export. Our country recently imported wheat seeds from the United States. So there's actually nothing wrong in exporting raw materials. What is wrong, in my opinion, is not producing enough and not processing in your country. And I think that is what the SAPZs, I know you're going to go into that, and what the AfDB is trying to address. There's nothing wrong in exporting raw materials. What is wrong in not processing in your country and not producing enough? I hope you get me.
Of course. So what are now the challenges when it comes to local production, when it comes to creation of that value chain where you are able to domicile the processing and production of the raw materials and transforming it into a finished product? What are the issues that Nigeria or Africa is faced with in that regards?
A lot. Let me give you a context so that our viewers can actually see the picture of what Dr. Adesina and the AfDB are trying to reverse. One crop that gives you a very good example of the exploitative nature of extractive agriculture is cocoa. And I don't know if you're aware that 70% of the global cocoa production is from West Africa, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria. 70% of the cocoa production. So if you just do a Google search in 2021, the entire export from Africa of cocoa amounted to about a little bit about 7.1 billion USD. Compare that with the net sales of top 10 chocolate manufacturing companies in the world. It was about 87.3 billion as against 7.1 in export. So, and there are a lot of challenges, of course, when it comes to domiciling this before we see the success of these SAPs and attendant problems as regards to production. You know, if you remember, I mentioned there's no problem in exporting. Our problem is underproductivity. The underproductivity of the smallholder farmer in Africa is the biggest culprit. And if you look at African agriculture, 80% of the food we eat in Africa is produced by smallholder farmers. These smallholder farmers are facing various challenges, from lack of mechanized land preparation to lack of access to high-yielding seeds, lack of access to qualitative chemicals, lack of access to affordable, on-time delivery of fertilizer, uncorrupted, affordable, on-time delivery of fertilizer, lack of access to best agronomic practices, lack of access to mechanized harvesting, for instance. And of course, they don't have access to a structured market. So I think these are the attendant problem. And based on that, I was doing a little research on the cocoa production system. The Ghanaian government just recently came up with a policy that encouraged local players in Ghana to process cocoa within Ghana instead of the export that has been going on for over 100 years. And what do we have now? Those small companies in Ghana that are battling with global behemoths in the chocolate factory industry, trying to process in Ghana, are now facing the problems of importation of dairy products, because you can process chocolate without milk, importation of sugar, and of course, lack of steady electricity, cold chain, because the chocolate manufacturing process has a lot to do with the cold chain. So these are some of the problems that I think we need to look into before we now start investing heavily in these SAPs that the African Development Bank is talking about.
Most definitely, we are going to delve further into these issues and see what probable solutions might be apt to address them. But then, Ibrahim, you just stay with us. We'll go on a short break, and when we return, we'll continue with the conversation. To stay with us. Of course, you are watching Business Edge on New Central Television, and we have been talking to Ibrahim Maigari. Ahmadu is the founder of the CEO of RiceAfrika Technologies, and we have been considering ways by which to escalate Africa's agricultural value chain and see how growth can come to it. So let me just go back to Ibrahim. You talked about different challenges or bottlenecks, as the case may be, looking at the issues of lack of electricity, lack in rules of trade, and of course modernized equipment, and some other areas that are impediments to growing Africa's agri-based value. So let me just now at this point bring in the issue of the SAPZs that we earlier mentioned in goings. Now, looking at the Special Agro-Industrial Processing Zones, which are designated areas where agricultural products are processed and manufactured into finished goods for exports. Now, what does it entail, and how well can that help in unlocking Africa's value chains?
I must first of all salute the courage of the AfDB, led by our very own Dr. Akinwumi Adesina. And I think the SAPS concept, it's a game changer. If we look at it holistically, instead of looking at the solution in bits and pieces. For the benefit of our viewers, the SAPS, that's Special Agro-Processing Zones, are going to be agro-based development initiatives designed to concentrate high agro-processing activities within areas of high agricultural potential to boost productivity and integrated production, processing and marketing of agricultural commodities. And they are purposely going to be built with shared facilities to enable agricultural producers, processors, aggregators, and distributors to operate in the same vicinity. It's just like a shared cluster to reduce transaction costs and share business development services for increased productivity and competitiveness. This ultimately will lead to the cost of production coming down, and because it's going to be a sort of a cluster that will promote interdependence, enhance productivity and competitiveness. And also by bringing adequate infrastructure, as in energy, water, roads, and ICT to rural areas, these special agro-processing zones will attract investments from private agro-industrialists, entrepreneurs, and they will contribute tremendously to the social and economic development of the rural areas. And they're also going to be located in peri-urban areas to reduce rural-urban migration. And I think, like I said, if we pull this through, if the African Development Bank pulls this through, it's going to be a game changer. It's going to open up our agricultural value chain extremely well, because it's going to bring in a lot of job employment. It's going to bring in investment to rural areas, closer to the sources of raw materials. And of course, it's going to bring down the cost of food production. And like I said, we have to take everything not in bits, in holistically. As we're ramping up our production and we are setting up these agro-processing zones, we will have enough to feed Africa, and of course, we'll have enough to export and earn the desired foreign exchange and also fill the world. So I think it's a very interesting initiative that has to be welcomed by all interested agro participants in the continent.
And coupled with that, Ibrahim, we know that it's also designed to attract investments, as you have said, and create jobs in the agricultural sector. Looking at the fact that the value chains will be broken down into various specialized areas, and expertise will be needed in those areas. But then there are still some concerns as regards incentives for investors, because you mentioned that it will attract investments. There are other issues that has to do with tax breaks, access to land, who gets what portion of land in terms of their ability to cultivate the land, capacity building, infrastructure, streamlined regulatory processes. All these technical areas are also a source for concern for stakeholders and those who may want to key into such a project. So how should these be addressed if Africa hopes to change its economic narrative?
I absolutely agree with you. Definitely all these things that we mentioned, tax breaks, access to land, insecurity, for instance. The government, before you encourage private investors to invest in agro-processing zones, you have to tackle the issue of insecurity, provide good road networks, which is basically like in most of sub-Saharan Africa, closer to the sources of raw materials. Like, so yeah, you got to spot on. These are very important amenities that will complement the establishment of those agro-processing zones. If you remember, I mentioned to you the initiative by the government in Ghana of encouraging private investors to set up factories within Ghana to process cocoa. And now those factories are complaining that they have to now import sugar. Fortunately, because of the African Free Trade Zone initiative, they are now importing sugar from South Africa. They go to Europe to import milk, because they don't have a dairy, a very, very stable and very active dairy sector in Ghana. So these are all requirements that the governments, African governments, must look into. It's not just, like I said, it's not just going to be in bits and pieces. It is a holistic environment. Production is going on, providing security, providing tax reliefs, providing incentives for investors, providing good road networks, electricity, stable power, and all those things are very important in the success of the agro-processing zones. And if we get it right, I'm telling you, it's going to open up the whole continent, and Africa is going to be the food basket and the food manufacturing headquarters of the whole world.
Okay, so let's quickly tie that to the issue of the African Continental Free Trade Agreements. Earlier on, you said that that could just be one pointer that might help accelerate this conversation, and of course, the initiative of the AfDB concerning Africa. But then if we are going to tie it together, because we know that in some countries, these agreements has not been fully implemented. We still have restrictions in some borders. We still have some bottlenecks in some African countries, depending on their level of development and capacity to fully internalize this particular trade agreement. It has not been able, most especially for these countries, to have a kind of connection or a kind of relationship between other African countries in terms of growing agricultural products and exports in that line. So if we are going to fully bring SAPZs and the AfCFTA together and merge them together, how do you think that will help? What are the areas do you think should be considered when we are to deal with issues as regards these two, and how well can we implement them to further liberate the African economy?
Thank you very much. I agree. There are some restrictions here and there, but that doesn't take away the fact that the African Continental Free Area is it's a wonderful initiative. And the World Economic Forum, according to its Insight report on that particular opportunity, stated that the free trade area, the African free trade area, is one of the world's largest by a number of people and economic size.
Okay, Ibrahim, sorry to cut in. Just give us a few seconds. I'd like you to just hold your thought for a few seconds. When we return, we'll have you say what you want to say and wrap it up. Just stay with us. Okay, Ibrahim, thank you so much for your understanding. Of course, our viewers appreciate your attention to this. So, Ibrahim, I'd like you to just conclude or continue with your summation as regards bringing the SAPZs initiative and, of course, AfCFTA together to see how it can revolutionize Africa's economy.
So I was saying, I agree with the fact that there are a lot of stumbling blocks. Some few countries are not yet on board, but still, if you look at what the World Economic Forum gave in terms of its insight in the opportunities of the African free trade and continental free trade area, it stated that it's one of the world's largest by a number of people and economic size, and it is projected to host about 1.7 billion people and oversee a transaction in the excess of 6.7 trillion in consumer and business spending by the year 2020. That gives you the extent of the potential of the African free trade zone. And according to that same report, agriculture has exceptional potential for increasing inter-African trade. Like I mentioned to you, Ghanaian manufacturers of cocoa now, manufacturers of chocolate, are importing sugar from South Africa. Meeting local demand, accelerating GDP growth, creating new jobs, improving inclusivity due to the upstream and the downstream linkages that the African free continental area will provide. It will also increase value addition. It will meet new local demand, and it will bring especially smallholder farmers who have told you that the smallholder farmers are responsible for the production of over 80% of the food that we consume in Africa. This free trade area will bring them into a wider supply chain. And there are boundless opportunities in the AfTA for new investment in agro-processing, for instance. You can imagine a market of over 6.7 trillion with over 1.7 billion just around you in one continent. If we scale up our production, we establish these SAPZs that the AfDB is talking about, taking advantage, getting it right, fixing all the little challenges that we have, turn Africa into a mad production house, and then we don't even have to take it out because we have a market of over 1.7 billion with the consumer spending of over 6.7 trillion by the year 2030, according to World Economic Forum. So the opportunities are massive for our continent.
Okay, $853 million will be mobilized in one area. $661 million will also be sought from partners. So quickly, Ibrahim, just in about a minute, which countries do you think the AfDB should be focusing on in terms of the investment of these funds?
To be very frank with you, I'm being very modest here. Not because I'm a Nigerian, but I think Nigeria is the go-to place for these reasons. We have the size, the population size. We have the market. We're over 200 million people. We have the youthful population. And agriculture and agri-technology is on the rise in Nigeria. And we have, for instance, this particular government of Asiwaju Bola Tinubu has just appointed as a person. I'm very excited with the appointment of a gentleman that's from the agri sector to head and lead one of the biggest fund, one of the biggest things to happen to our agriculture in Nigeria is the establishment of the Nigerian Agricultural Development Fund. Recently, the president appointed a gentleman that's from the sector, from the private sector-driven person, who we believe, if he brings his private sector experience to bear in that fund, Nigeria will take advantage of this, and Nigeria is the place to go because we have the enabling environment, and if we get it right, we fix our problems. Nigeria can become the supply chain of Africa, can start from Nigeria.
Okay, I see how patriotic you are about Nigeria, Ibrahim, Maigari, Ahmadu, but then, of course, you are the founder, CEO, RiceAfrika Technologies. Thank you so much for your contribution this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Now, economists believe that the export of processed agricultural products can help Africa reduce its reliance on imports. And Africa currently imports a large proportion of its processed agricultural products. But then by exporting more processed agricultural products, more foreign exchange comes in, more jobs are created, the value chain processes become more specialized and robust, and the overall economy will feel the positive impact in no time. We're going on a short break now. When we return, we'll bring you international business stories. Don't go away.